right. Well, thank you guys all for being here. I'm so delighted and so honored to be here for this Boober session. Thank you, Javier, for hosting these, having these, and I'm thankful for the opportunity. So today I'm going to be speaking about this book, Modern Art and the Death of a Culture by H.R. Rookmaaker. This kind of funny side information, one of his names is Roelof, which is a very Dutch name. My grandfather, my brother, my cousin, my uncle, I've got lots of Roelofs in the family. So it's just kind of funny, oh, that's so cool. He's a Dutchman and he's a art critic, jazz critic. And so he has a lot of very interesting insights into art and its meaning. So one of the most important things that Rookmaaker wants us to understand is that art is consequential. Art is important, and art ultimately shows us a type of insight into reality. And in that way, art itself is meta in a sense, because what it tries to reveal to us is the lens by which we see things, right? When an artist goes to make their work, and we're focusing predominantly here on visual art and painting in particular. When the artist goes to make their painting, they are automatically making valuations, right? They are automatically engaged in a type of metaphysical decision. And in that way, art is always a kind of meta practice, if we want to call it that. It's inherently tied to the metaphysical. And so this is really important then. This is really important because art says something. It says something about, it's very unique because it silently speaks, right? It says something to us about the condition of man's own metaphysics, right? His own spirit. It's almost a litmus test for the zeitgeist of the age, right? The spirit of the age. And later we're going to look at some art, and there's even a piece called The Spirit of the Age in the Dada movement. So this is very important for Rookmaaker. He really wants us to understand that art says something to us. It tells us something about the cultural condition, the state of man, and the state of his spirit, even while it's very visual and very physical, right? Because the thing is that if art was merely about rendering, like making things look like they do, it would be obsolete when photography comes into play, right? Like we have the technology of photography now. And so, it's kind of like, well, why would anyone ever, do any types of realism or realistic imagery or anything like that? Well, it's because they're trying to convey a particular meaning, right? Or understanding of reality. And in that way, it still has very much an important role. Even in light of all of our new technologies of capture, like photography. So what I really appreciated about the book is that he really does a good job of kind of giving an overview of how man's metaphysical understanding of himself, right, and the world informed art. And so just to hop back really quick to the point about rendering, just things looking exactly as they are, right? He is not really he gets into the fact that modern art ultimately kind of wins the battle in the art world. And for him, that's not so much problematic because it looks abstract. It's problematic because it revolts against our very ontology, the fullness of our physicality, which is also metaphysical. So anyways, let's kind of start talking about the art movements themselves. He starts way back, in the medieval ages. He's talking about how most people had an understanding of reality that included God, right? It included a metaphysical transcendent. And in this way, art was not merely historical, but it was an invitation, right? Let's go to an image here for a second. I'm going to just kind of incorporate them as I talk, if that's okay. it's nice to have visuals. I mean, it's all about visual art. So okay, share screen. Okay, here we go. So, okay, icons. Some of the earliest art, obviously there's even like, prehistoric art. But I'd like to kind of start here, since there's this heavy emphasis on Rookmaaker on the metaphysical dimension. What he wants us to understand about the icons are that they say something to us in the moment. That in the moment itself of our engagement with the art, without any other, context or understanding, that it tells us something, right, about a woman, about motherhood, a child. There are things that we can see within the image itself that give us certain understandings, right? And this icon is by Duccio, an Italian painter, and it's Madonna with Child. And so, there are many versions of this, right? And it would take different forms through the different, through the Romantic age of painting, Baroque style, all of that. But what he wants to say is that art is always more than just the painting, right? It's telling us something. And for icons, because they were in touch with the transcendent, right, with God, they had the ability to invite us, right? The whole point of the icon of Madonna with Child is to invite people to actually pray to Mary, right? To look to her as a source of nurturing, right? To nurture us through our weak moments, our infantile situations, right? So the main point of an icon is that it is, it shows us something about reality, how we understand our condition, our human condition. And for icons, they were very in touch with the metaphysical. They may not have called it that, right? But they had a sense of faith, God, religion. And what's interesting is that the risk for any imagery, right, is that it can become an idol. Right? I mean, it's funny because, like, to Barnes' book, The Iconoclast, there's always these kind of this pendulum swing, right, between like something that becomes dogmatic. The icon itself is a kind of dogmatic thing. And then there's the iconoclasm, right? This iconoclastic movement to shatter that, right? And but then we get like new icons, So anyways, the idea though is that if an icon isn't in touch with the living God, right? We can understand this well from Abrahamic religions with a true living God, right? Or if we want to think about this in Buber's Thou, right? The Thou, it's the icon becomes an invitation, but without the transcendent element, okay, it starts to just make images iconic, right? And it's very interesting because modern art wanted to basically be iconoclastic while it continued to make icons. And so in that way, there's something very, very interesting about modern art, because it basically is at war with itself. And I'm jumping way ahead, and we're going to get to Picasso, but basically, like, Picasso says, modern art must be killed. This means that one has to kill oneself if one is to continue accomplishing things. What is interesting to me is that there is something similar, though, right, about mystical understandings of the self in the metaphysical dimension, right, meta and physical, in that there's an emphasis on dying to self or killing the ego. And so it has a similar project to Picasso as well, except that it's difficult to find what it is exactly that sublates that nihilism or that killing into something higher, right? Or something transcendent of the physical, except art itself. Art in a way then becomes its own religion. So anyways, I think the icon is a great place to start for Rookmaaker's point that art says something to us, right? Let's go on to another image here. Sorry, these are a little small. We are having trouble with getting these to be larger. So yeah, this is the Martyrdom of Saint Livinus in 1633. So this was just before really the Age of Enlightenment was very very prominent and really happening and everything like that. This was still in a time of basically the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. And what the painting shows is that there's an openness in the sky. There's a reason this man is dying, even if it seems absurd to us. He hears God and believes that it's worth dying for, right? His belief. And so he's being martyred. I think they pretty graphically pull out his tongue, and he's going to be killed. But the angels come down, right? The sky is open. There's an open heaven, and there's a relation between the heavens and the earth in this painting. So here I'm going to stop this screen sharing for just a sec. Here, at this point in time, something really, sorry, I don't know where to click on this. Okay, something really important happens now in history that Rookmaaker really wants to draw our attention to, and this is the Enlightenment. It reminds me a lot of Said Hussein. Oh my gosh, I forget his last name, but he's a perennial philosopher who basically said that it's very ironic and paradoxical, but the Enlightenment, well, it brought many good things, right? But it also brought this severing of man from the metaphysical. It was, oh, that's it, sorry, Hussein Nasser. Nasser is the last name of the perennial philosopher. What it wanted to do is that the Enlightenment did not want to have to rely on tradition. It did not want to have to rely on basically like what, in a sense, it kind of didn't even want to rely on what came before it, because it wanted to be able to allow man in his own reasoning and rational capacity and his perceivable senses to understand the world. Okay, so basically what the Enlightenment wanted man to be able to do is to what you see is what you know. Or sorry, the phrase, Rookmaaker does a really good job of like making a comparison, but basically, oh, that's it. What you know is what you see. So basically whatever it is that you can see, whatever you can measure, whatever you can, basically make empirical, is only that which you can see or perceive or sense. And the Enlightenment had they had good reasons for doing such a thing, because they were very concerned that religions just cause tribalism and war, and people can abuse religion, and that is all very true. But man does have a particular ontology, right? He has a particular design, let's just say, or at least Rookmaaker wants us to understand it to be such, and that design is metaphysical. We are not here on our own accord, right? Even if we just think about the fact that we come from a lineage of people, right? We come from a family. There is something that is very much, he wants us to understand that there is something that is beyond our immediate physicality that brings us to here where we are in this moment in time. Okay, so there is something about the Enlightenments Project which was very ambitious and was very interested in allowing us to understand things simply by what we can observe and see. And in this way, man can become, in a way, like his new objective and his new kind of universal truth is anything that anyone could see. Like, it becomes very much like anyone should just be able to come to wherever you are phenomenologically and just have the same understanding of reality simply by what you can sense and see. And again, there were a lot of great desires with this. I mean, science really became even more like, there's a lot of progress in science and all of that. The only thing is that for Rookmaaker, that was not actually taking the fullness. He's almost like science wasn't science enough, because if it was science, it would also think about our conscience and like these things that kind of go into our valuations and such, right? Even to say that, you know, what is true is the empirical, or what is true is only what you can see, is a type of metaphysical claim, right? It's a type of value that you're making. So we can never really escape it, being metaphysical, or we could say like even philosophical if you want to. But I think the degree to which we are aware of that is the degree to which we can become more fully human, right? And have a fuller sense of reality. So what's so interesting to me is that there's a lot of talk about, like, you know, science opening Pandora's box, and in many ways it did, but it closed man in a box of his senses. It basically it confined him to himself, okay, in order to discern reality. And yeah, so this actually relates to a passage. I just want to interject really quick from Buber on the idea of man's ability to, you know, see the other, right? See the thou, see what's not, that what is beyond merely himself in his self-containment. And he says, if he can no longer do this, and that's to be able to say to the living unknown God by saying thou, with all his being to another living and known man, if he can no longer do this, see the thou in the other, basically, then there certainly remains for him the sublime illusion of a detached thought, that he is a self-contained self. As man, he is lost. So it's very interesting, because the Enlightenment almost wants to allow man to find himself and be very independent and able to have a sense of self. And that very act is what loses the self, right? It loses his ability to orient himself and to understand his full purpose in the earth, right? And so let's go back to art for a second. What does this mean for art? Okay, what does this mean for art? Well, what's interesting is we talked about Rubens' painting, right? When there was still this understanding or, you know, belief in a transcendent, there's this open skies. Well, what happened next? Then that was in 1663, I think. The next illustration I want to look at is from Goya. Where is it? Okay, here, let's go back a little bit. Okay. Here we have Goya's illustration of the dream of reason produces monsters. So everything is always both, right? There's always good and bad. Sometimes monsters, you know, there can be something good about recognizing the monstrous in us. But there's this kind of almost way in which we wanted to get rid of the monsters of like the tribalism and religions and things that people were doing bad with that, by just getting rid of it, right? And yet you could never get rid of our metaphysical dimension, because suddenly, like, what, you know, once was religion now just becomes another type of religion, right? Reason becomes the religion. And then what's interesting is that, like, you know, man, at least from Goya's perspective, this left man very isolated, you know, because he's been kind of contained in the box of his senses and only what he can see as reality. And in a sense, then he becomes the monster to himself, because he's cut off from the fullness of his self, which was always relation, right? Something I forgot to mention with the icon, but icons were done for a community, right? There was something about understanding how it related to other people and their witnessing of that art. So in this image itself, it's interesting because it's no longer angels, but, you know, bats, and they seem to be pressing the figure down, whereas in the Rubens art, the figure was being like elevated toward the heavens, right? This man is basically on his desk, and it, you know, even uses the words there, the dream of reason produces monsters, that, you know, he's pushed further down in a sense by whatever is above him. You know, it's a closed image in terms of its composition. And again, whatever is coming from above is not, there's not an open sky. It almost seems to just come within the closed system itself, right? This makes me think a little bit of like Zizek's self-relating negativity, right? Where there's this, the risk of that is that you get isolation and a lack of a sense of your, actually of yourself, even in the very attempt to really solidify yourself, you know. And you know, maybe we could say like, oh, you know, Goya's being pessimistic, but what he really wanted, what I think he was really ahead of his times in understanding that if we, you know, if we reduce everything to facts, you know, where is the meaning, right? For a Rookmaaker, his formula is that facts plus meaning equals reality, right? And so if we get rid of meaning, which ultimately is going to be a metaphysical dimension because it's what people value, what people, you know, what people value beyond what's here. Love is one of those things, right? It's not really something we can point to, but we can point to its manifestations in a sense, right? There's kind of a indirectness that makes reality fuller. And yeah, all of the things that are values or meanings are often things that are, yeah, just not they're not tangible things, even though they impact tangible things, right? You know, like love, grief, you know, honor, whatever that you want to talk about in terms of values, respect, all of those things are not, you know, tell me where you can find that in the world, right? Like concretely as itself. You cannot. It's only ever found in relation to each other, right? Yeah. So there was one more thing I was going to say on that, but oh yeah, just the idea that, you know, for Rookmaaker, because of this idea of facts plus meaning equals reality, it's almost like, you know, we can't have a reality without meaning itself. We can't just have facts, as much as we want to say that they are enough, right? Or it's enough to just have materiality. It's enough to just have facts. It's safer that way, right? Because in a way, like the Enlightenment wanted to make things kind of safer, right? We can avoid all of this nonsense and tragedy by just kind of being able to make things much more discernible by anyone. Anyone can see the same exact thing in this room, whatever it is. But what Rookmaaker says is like, what he says is that what you see is what you know. Because like if we were to walk in an orchard, and you know, one man's lived there all his life and his dad has grown apple trees forever, what he's going to see is, you know, 16 varieties of apple trees. The other person just sees trees, right? So they don't know all of that. And I think what happened was the Enlightenment made us not aware or not know the fullness of ourself, which is, you know, ontologically metaphysical. And it's strange because Rookmaaker, in talking from like this metaphysical theological God perspective, it seems like, oh, well, what he's saying is just trying to kind of make everything more mystical and meta and spiritual. But what he's trying to say is that, ironically, when you take out the meta aspect of it, the physical itself is harmed, basically. Like it's deconstructed, right? It loses, like in the very attempt to make things very concrete and physical, and sure, you lose it. You know, you get complete instability, fragmentation. Okay, so let's keep going with the pictures here. Thank you all for your continued attention here. Okay, sorry. Okay, so we have to also remember that, like, even after the Enlightenment, some of like the worst wars in history happened. You know? It's not like, I don't mean to say that laughing, that's very sad, but like the idea is that wars, some of the most awful human atrocities happened in light of reason, right? And it's kind of funny because it's interesting because the age of reason almost didn't give people a reason for, you know, for living or dying, like in the Rubens painting, right? The man died for a reason. Yeah, maybe it was absurd to us because we could not hear. The thing is, the word absurd comes from the Latin sordo, which is to be deaf. Okay, so that man in that, you know, the martyr, Saint Livinus, he died for a reason, right? Even if no one else understood that reason, he did, because, you know, he could hear whatever he felt was the call of God on his life. what the interesting thing is, with the age of reason, it almost took out a reason for living for many people. And the artists in particular were very aware of this. They felt like, well, what is our reason? What is our purpose too? Because if it's just about, especially with the introduction of photography, what is the reason? Like, why are we still feeling so compelled to, give images to reality and give a sense of what it is, its meaning, and so it's funny, it's interesting, because it went from having a reason for living. The age of reason actually, in a sense, sort of undercut people's actual, what is your reason for living? And then living itself became, in a sense, absurd. And people felt this strongly with the wars that, would plague different nations, especially too, as we get into like World War I, World War II. Okay, so artists' response to this, they started to feel a sense of like, well, okay, we're just painting. Well, our job is to essentially paint what we see, because what we know is only what we can see. So we move into like the Impressionist movement here. Big jump, basically. In that big jump too, there's a strong dualism movement in Christianity, where Puritans basically just felt like, well, look, like, art is just materialistic. It does just make us not, in touch with God, and so we're just not going to do it. One of the main things about this book, Rookmaaker, is saying that people who have who understand or are aware of their metaphysical dimension, or they believe in God, they believe in a transcendent beyond just the materiality, it's their job to not leave that post. It's their responsibility to, stay there and fight the battles in the art world, basically. It's funny, because art comes from, in a sense, arm. The arm is the weapon. Artemis is the goddess of the hunt. So art is always, in a sense, sort of like fighting a type of battle. And yeah, his big thing, and I really would encourage people to read the book itself, because there's so much in this book. But he really does want, specifically, he's a Protestant Dutchman, and he's wanting people of faith to continue to make art. He's also really, really strong on, like, there's no such thing as Christian art. He said Jesus didn't come to the earth to make us Christians. He came to make us fully human. And so that's a big emphasis for Rookmaaker, that, basically, like, this sort of more Gnostic trend in Protestantism, and he's critical of even Calvinism, which I think he was technically a Calvinist himself, was that they forgot that God was incarnate in Jesus, and that there is just as much the physical in the metaphysical, right? You cannot have one without the other, and they always go together. Okay, so that was like a kind of detour side tangent. But yeah, he's really about, a lot of times, about, like, really, when we capture reality, we're going to see both the brokenness and hope, or at least the chance for redemption. You're going to see both. And so yeah, it's important to be able to understand our, like, the fact that when art can take into account metaphysicality and physicality, it actually has the chance to sublate itself, and hopefully, elevate us as well, in terms of the beauty, truth, and goodness that it shows. Even if it's showing something tragic, right, there can still be something good, even in something that can be tragic, right? Okay, so the Impressionist movement, it is a really interesting time when the artists thought, okay, like, what is our role? They felt they were wanting to just present what they felt and what they sensed. So for Impressionists, it was really about the sensations, right? The sensations that hit the eyes. And it's, oddly enough, when you actually get to just the senses, like, just what are the impressions, right? You start to get this slightly more dreamlike painting. It's the lighting. It's almost like that would not ever have happened in more humanistic or romantic style art, where on that man's shoulder there, the front right, that he has those spots on his back. It's like, oh, did he mess up? Did the artist mess up? No, he was painting the way that the light was moving through the trees and creating shadows on his back. So light was being acknowledged and represented in very new ways during the Impressionist movement. But there is this real kind of emphasis on, like, the senses, right? Let's really, like, give ourselves completely to this idea of the senses that make our reality. And so we'll just illustrate that. And what you get from that is these, I mean, surrealism was a whole nother movement, but these slightly surreal, sort of dreamlike, softer type of images of like the way that there's the light and the surrounding itself is softened slightly. And this is particularly interesting. So next, like from Impressionism, there was kind of a way in which the artist was kind of concerned with being able to create what the senses saw, but still be able to do something that did tap into a deeper meaning or understanding of reality. And so they were in a way kind of on a quest for what is reality, and what is it exactly that are we painting, and how are we painting it? So from Impressionism, we move into Expressionism, okay? And Expressionism is where there's kind of this desire to find something, meaningful in the physical itself. So this is a painting by Kandinsky. It's called All Saints. And sorry, this painting before, I didn't even say, it was Renoir. And Renoir's painting was in 1876. And yes, okay, going down here to Kandinsky. Okay, Kandinsky was in 1911. This is called All Saints. And what he wanted to do was basically say that like we can find a real sense of reality in colors themselves, in vibrations, in the vibration of sound. He was really big on painting sounds, and he even would do like a kind of a type of ritual of like saying certain mantras to get himself in this like mindset of what is the subject. And so, yeah, and Expressionism is really interesting, and Kandinsky is very a genius artist in his display of colors, and movement and all of that. What you can start to see is a type of, you can start to see it a bit with Renoir, right? Like there's a little bit of this like fragmentation, right? It's becoming more and more apparent as modern art progresses. And in a way, they were desperate to understand what is a universal beyond just our senses. Because when it was just about the senses and what people could look at and perceive, then it was like, well, why does it matter that I see it, right? Like if anyone could see this, why does it matter that I see it? Because it would be the same for anyone. That's what reason wants to kind of do. It wants to kind of make everything kind of equal and equally accessible. And so it's like, well, why does it matter that I see it a certain way? So this is where Expressionism was kind of reactionary in that regard. It was like, well, look, if you feel the shadows blue, make it like very blue. If you feel that this is like, that the movement would be illustrated in this way, do it that way. So here we start to see like this idea that like the artist sort of reveals that there wasn't enough. There was something missing. There was something missing in just, in reason alone, because it failed to give like the reason, right? The meaning behind things, the interpretation, right? An artist is a type of interpreter. And if it's just about like recording the facts, then where is interpretation? And yet we always have interpretation. Even facts are being interpreted. It's just we're not always aware that we're doing that interpretation, right? The artist was aware and wondered about his role as the interpreter. Okay, Kandinsky, let's go to, okay. So from Expressionism, the art is becoming much more abstract, right? It's kind of interesting because in an age of reason and scientism, it should become more concrete, right? But in a sense, it wanted to become more abstract, and maybe its wonderful purpose is to make us rethink things, right? It's almost like the Heideggerian broken doorknob, like this is not quite working, right? Like a person doesn't usually have, an eye up on their forehead and an eye down on their cheek or whatever it is, like in some of Picasso's more Cubist paintings. And so maybe it makes us question things again, right? But the art itself often really only presented the question. And sometimes modern art was what it maybe did not do necessarily is offer a potential as the solution besides more of that, right? More of that fragmentation. So, okay, yeah, after candidacy, so yeah, at this time too, we're getting into like post-World War I, the Dada movement begins in art. There's already been this expressionism, there's already been this kind of abstraction of art. And now we get into some really interesting paintings and sculptures. This one was just really interesting to me because this is by Haussmann in 1920, and it's called The Spirit of Our Age. So it's interesting because in trying to find this sort of like universal meaning, or this universal understanding of the world, which I guess to me is just like there's something about something behind it all, right? That they were trying to get at, and they felt like, well, reason tried to give us that, and all it did was produce World War I, right? And Dada movement was just basically sick of that, right? It decided to just go in the direction of irrationality, absurdism. It embraced it, and yeah, you almost have something that's like it portrays man as like just merely I almost want to say like robotic, right? He looks like he's a severed head. He's not in his full context, and that's what a lot of like absurdist painting and sculpture started to do, was really kind of take man out of his context, because honestly, the Enlightenment had taken man out of his full context ontologically. So the Dada movement was very interesting. They also really believed in like just experiences. So performance art really became huge in this time. But a lot of times we see like the fun stuff, the playful things about modern art, like the colors and the childlikeness and the sort of the playfulness. But there was a dark side to modern art, in the absurd art. A lot of the art that showed, as we'll get to with Bacon, tormented figures, or they would put on like very absurd plays where people would urinate on the stage. I mean, just things like that. They were really, really, really trying to push convention. And even though they became artists that were iconic, they were very skeptical and pushed back on the authority itself, the high art authorities, basically, in galleries and things like that. So a lot of what they did was, they wanted kind of fleeting experiences and things that couldn't be captured, because there's sort of this revolt almost against sense as meaning, right? Merely sense as meaning. Okay, let's get to Picasso. Yeah, Picasso is a giant in the art world. He is very bold, and ultimately he kind of takes the last step in saying that there is no absolute, right? There is no absolute. There are no universals. And basically that this world is absurd, nonsensical, and without meaning. And so Picasso was in a way, very brave to take that step. And he demonstrated it very vividly in his art. This is The Weeping Woman in 1937. And, a lot of his art became very, the Cubist movement. It's funny because right before Picasso took this last step, the Cubist movement was all about trying to find this meaning, this kind of universal behind it all. Like what is like actually the spirit that is, informing what we're doing. And they basically wanted to, have some type of sense of the mystical or the spirit without God, right? So they were trying to do that and just having a hard time understanding how to do that. And art is just such a beautiful place to look at how did that play out, right? So the Cubists actually wanted to find some sort of sense of that meaning in the senses, to stick with that paradigm. And that's where you get the Cubist desire to see shapes and forms. There's almost this like Platonic shapes and forms that then arise, right, in their art. But it harkens back to the concept of the Enlightenment putting man in a box, because now illustrations are extremely boxy, right? They're very they're very geometric, and there's this sense of like there are literally boxes representing humans humans, plants, architecture, it didn't really matter because man didn't have necessarily a different ontological condition than anything else in the material world, right? So the art itself sort of showed the being in a box, but I think the Cubist and then Picasso in the step, why I say they were brave is that they did show us, they were trying to break out of that box. It just so happened that in trying to do so, they continued to put, the human in boxes. So in terms of his form and shape, it became in a very box-like shapes, forms, these Platonic shapes and forms was what people ended up having as like, well, maybe that's our universal, like maybe that's our meaning, but it really wasn't enough. And that's why, Picasso basically just threw down the gauntlet and said, like, there's just no universal, there's no absolutes, there's no capital T truth, there's none of that. There's none of that. There's nihilism. And so he was very, he was very much leading the way for this and deconstructing his own style. He never really felt like, in his quote, modern art must be killed, right? You must, and the artist must kill oneself if they're going to continue to accomplish things. Only thing is that you can't actually kill yourself and still be living if there's not some metaphysical dimension, right? You would just have killed yourself. So it's like even in that, there sort of shows that there has to be some sort of metaphysical dimension that sustains man into still living, even though he's killed himself, right? Or killed his art, because he's still making it. He didn't completely annihilate it, right? But anyways, yeah, Picasso is huge in making this sort of statement about the fabric of reality. The last art piece I want to show you, and then I might say one more thing and then open it up. Sorry, I've gone over 30 minutes. Is oh no, maybe that's the last one. No, big. Okay, did I include this one here? Okay, yeah. This is the illustration on the front of the cover of the book, and it's called Head. It's just called Head. Roman numerals are hard for me. 6. It was done in 1949 by Bacon, and this is kind of what the man's literally in a box screaming and we can't hear him, right? This is the absurd, right? This is the kind of like, this is our condition, all we have is absurd. And in fact, it would almost be better if man just didn't exist. Like Henry Miller was a poet, and he wrote a poem that Rookmaaker includes, where it talks about this idea that like, we don't even want to be, restore humanity or be human anymore. We just want to be, the earth itself. And that's kind of interesting because it relates so strongly to geometric shapes and forms, right? Geo, it's about the land and the earth itself. And Cézanne says something about how you can never be too subjected to nature. So man became subjected to nature, in a sense, because he had to, in a way, find something by which to be subject to in order to show the subjectivity of his perspective of art, right? And what he's making, and his perspective of what is reality, right? And so I think that's really interesting, this idea of just almost like, it would be better if we weren't made, like this, it would be better if there weren't humans. And so that's why there was such deconstruction. There was really nothing to say that, man has any sort of worth or a purpose that can be redemptive, good, true, beautiful, all of that, right? So I kind of left it off on like a very, like a low note, but I think what's really, what could potentially, what Rookmaaker wants to say is that when we remember that we are in relation, when we remember that we actually are in relation, right? That whether we take whether we take sort of like a Buddhist notion of our dependent origin, right? Or the Christian concept of like the communal ontology, right? The Trinity, the person of God, the personal. When we remember that, then we remember that the universal was always like universal, right? It's you, it's me. It's the relation between people. It's the relation between God and, sorry, it's the relation between man and the transcendent. And for a lot of human history, that would have been God, or even if we want to go way back to think about how that would have been nature itself. But there was something about being beyond oneself that was important to the self itself, right? And so, yeah, there's this way in which, like, the only way you get to a sense of a universal, in the sense that there is meaning, right? It does matter, right? You aren't just matter, you do matter. What you make matters, right? Is to understand that the universal is because of who you are in your particularity, right? It's particular. It has to do with you, particular. And apart from the you, then we're just particles, right? It's kind of indifferent whether it's me or you or whoever doing whatever, right? There's kind of a mechanistic cognitive machine sort of feeling that can come with that. And so what I think, how to tie this in, and I really will wrap it up, sorry, is that basically, I think what it can be a beautiful restoration for art and its purpose in restoring our hope in humanity, restoring a sense of that what we do does matter, and that there is beauty, truth, and goodness, is to remember the you and the I, right? There's a sense in which beauty is in the eye of the beholder. The artist is the eyes, in a way, that show what is the society seeing, what is the spirit that the society sees itself through. And it's that type of, I and you that ultimately restores art into its proper place and role of offering something to society and to humanity to build it up, and to substantiate it and sublate it, rather than simply effacing it. So thank you, guys. That's my presentation. All right. Anyone have any thoughts? I went so long. Sorry about that.
Well, I really enjoy it because like I really enjoy the how we move through the ages, because like I used to I didn't like art because it was like it's just like an image, and then I have like this wonderful professor that actually taught me like, okay, if you see it this way, like it actually matters, and it evokes the feelings that it that it's that's the purpose, right? To evoke the feelings that the image or the painting gives you, and I think that was really wonderful, and going through the ages and seeing the clear distinction between like the god coming from heavens to save them, and then the monsters. And actually, Francisco de Goya is one of my favorite painters. Like I really like him. My favorite one is like all the famous one of Saturn eating his son. I think, yeah, it's so. And I was as the presentation unfolded, I was taking notes because it was so many things were clicking in, because um I do feel it and experience it, because um it's like when you're a fish in the water, and you don't realize you're within water. So when I speak with my friends, it's always very utilitarian, like what career, what job are you going to take, shalala, like all this stuff. And there's this like emptiness or lack of meaning or sensation that exists within or outside the physical. And it's funny because sometimes is not maybe, but almost ridiculed, in the way that these are like, oh, you believe in something else than the things that you can see, like stop being so naive or something. So it's interesting. So I really like the concepts. And within art, I saw that explanation of why the pathologies of what we experience today. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Emilio. Just a really quick thing. I would really highly recommend reading the book itself, because even though I went so much longer than I was supposed to, I really only scratched like the surface of it. So yeah, it's certainly a good read. And if you find yourself to be a creative and have some faith, if whether it's Christianity or any type of religion, I think this book really speaks to that. As don't just think of it as, just worldly, it's like the idea is like, even the idea of like, in the prayer that, Jesus prays with our Father, it's like, their kingdom come, their will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So it's like the earth is redeemed and it is already in its process of redemption. So, we participate in that redemption in what we create. So yeah, anyways, just read the book.
Can you remember me can you say again the title of the book? I'm just going to write down. I forgot. Thank you.
Yeah, so did you, I realized I was on mute. Did you get it? Yeah? Okay. Does anyone else have any? Oh, I see a raised hand. Okay. I'm kind of not very familiar with Zoom sometimes, so. Barnes do you or Rivera want to say something? Okay, yes. Javier asked us to wait 1 second, no problem.
I'm just gonna jump in. Okay, so there's just a lot going on in our environment, but yeah, thanks for kind of summary. It was really good in terms of like, common like critique of modern art is that, oh, it doesn't mean anything, or it isn't, or it doesn't represent anything. But like going beyond that and actually saying that no, this is like the result of like a certain metaphysical judgment was really important. I really appreciated you kind of slowing down on Goya's The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters, because I don't know Spanish, so I don't know what the exact translation is, but you also mentioned like it could be interpreted as the dream of reason produces monsters.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting because obviously I've seen it before and just kind of skipped over it as it's Goya's critique of the Enlightenment failure, basically, especially after the French Revolution. I sort of took, so like it sort of could be related to the sleep of metaphysical reason as well. So that kind of butts up against the idea of God is dead, right? And I just sort of wanted to ask you, do you think that the kind of postmodern art we're stuck in now is a sort of sleep, and that the metaphysical side can one day wake up, or has there been a murder and are we kind of stuck with this sort of postmodern whirlwind we're in?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm optimistic, but I never think we can be completely stuck. Like I always think there's a chance to redeem that. But I think that's a very interesting irony you're pointing out, Samuel, where it's that it's like dreaming somehow, and actually to reintroduce the metaphysical would be to awaken, when often dreams are themselves metaphysical, right? Like you're doing things in real space, but it's not really happening. So it's kind of interesting, right? Because then, to me, it's very much the problem of like separation, right? It's like this autonomous rationality that makes us like, all we have then as the other is our dreams, in a way, I want to say. We used to understand dreams as like a divine connection, just even think about like Mary having a dream about, there's these angelic visions through dreams and stuff like that. I still believe that is very much viable and right today, but one has to be open to it, I suppose. And it's funny because like the surrealist movement was very dream heavy. It's like, well, we will just escape basically just like the crappiness of the world by painting dreams, and the surreal. So yeah, I guess I just want to hit on the fact that I think that's a great paradox there, right? Of like how reason then, which is supposed to be very tactile and tangible and physical and measurable, ends up like setting us into nightmares, bad dreams, or like, bad, like sort of just being in our head about stuff, overthinking, like mental health can suffer from that, etc. And yeah, the idea of being able to get outside of ourselves, outside of that, is to open ourselves up, I think, once again to the other, you know, even if we just think about it in like a Hegelian sense, to the dialectic. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting today because art now, like with technology, it's funny, I was thinking about it, I was like, we're in a box now. Like it's this very strange blend now of like where we're in boxes, like we're literally in boxes right now, you know, but we're very, very like vivid, realistic looking because it's photographic, you know, video. And so we live in a very interesting time where maybe we forget sometimes that though there is something very real about these digital spaces, it's not the full phenomenological reality. And so I don't know. I guess what I mean to say, Barnes, is that like I think art today is becoming like in our hands a lot more, like literally with like phones. Like people are becoming content creators, and like that's kind of the new, like in a way that's good because it brings art back into the quotidian, but it also like why, right? Like why am I making what I'm making, and all of that, like meaning becomes, you know, there's a lot of potential and ability to create, and a lot that is created, and a lot of information, and like a deluge of all these things, but like what helps one navigate through all of that, right? So that was kind of a long-winded answer. I hope that answered your question to some degree, Sam. Okay, thanks. Emilio raised hand.
Yeah, I want to ask, for example, if a painter nowadays made paintings that were more like soulful, or that carried this metaphysical like condition, would that be relevant in the sense that you could say like, okay, that's a turning into a new type of art that does take into account the metaphysical, or would that just be like, oh, that's a fluke, like most painters are doing this? Or how would you say, yeah, how would you interpret that if an artist is like, okay, I'm going to make paintings, well, that have soul in a way? I don't know.
Like how would we discern that, Emilio? Like how would we even tell the difference between somebody who's painting from like a metaphysical framework or not, or like
Yeah,
with soul or something?
yeah, and also the like, but like if we say that, okay, this person is painting with soul, like you could see in the painting that there's a metaphysical intention in it. It's not just like absurd or nihilistic. If you could see that in the painting, would that kind of, I don't know, like reverse course, or is that, or would we need like a lot of more people or artists to be that way, or how would you think about it?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. For some reason, like a verse in like in the New Testament came to mind of like, you know, a ship is steered by a small rudder, right? You know, fire started with a spark. So I think that it's not necessarily about quantity here. I think it is ultimately going to be about quality. I think it's going to be about people who like, you know, put their blood, sweat, and tears into it. And look, I think every art has a metaphysical reality to it, even abstract art, right? It's just, what does it say about our condition? What does it say? What is it saying about our metaphysical, right? But what I think can hopefully be something that sublimates that art into really kind of like speaking to us, right? Like resonating with us, like gripping our soul. I think that is going to come from a lot of hard work from people who invest their own soul into it to revive the soul of men. And I think I don't know, again, maybe this is too optimistic, but I think that it's you know, a forest fire starts with a spark. So I don't think it has to do with quantity as much as quality. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, would it be nice like if there was more of it? Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I have a follow-up question then, but how do we like, because I'm not sure, because I'm not really versed in the historic movements of art, but for example, at the same time, I would assume, right, that at the same time that Francisco de Goya was painting this well, this painting that's like the reason brings out monsters, I'm sure that there was some guy somewhere painting like a beautiful flower, right? Something, and with really nice vivid colors. So how do we because and I'm asking this question because there's a painter that's called Leonid Afremov that has recently passed away like 2 years ago. But I see his paintings and they're like really really colorful, really, and I feel and I like because most of the paintings I see, like I see them and they're like that's a nice picture, but some of them I see something and I feel it, and this in particular bring within me this feeling of like of hopefulness, or like this vividness, and at the same time I'm sure that there are some other um patrons doing some other stuff. Like there's this one and I feel like encouraged by it, so I don't know how how to correlate that. Maybe yeah, that's why I was bringing the point of like quantity, because if there's one and there's like 50 that are like nihilistic, like maybe that's the answer, but I don't know. Yeah.
I think ultimately it's very difficult to determine like what stands the test of history, you know, like why, and yeah, so it's like it you could be having both going on, but there are certain things that become iconic, right? That there are certain things that are chosen for galleries, and those things are in a way, I think, like it's strange because the moment that there's a sort of this nihilistic bent of like it's meaningless, it kind of became meaningless to people's everyday life too. Like it's just like, well, like what's the point? It's kind of interesting, it's kind of, you know, it like provokes some questions. It's but yeah, so I don't know. I think, I guess what I want to say is that it's the things that do end up being like canonical, or like the things that end up like being chosen to stay and whatever is usually like what's being valued as what should stay and stick around. Like this is more true than that, you know? And so I don't know if that makes any sense, but like there may have been some like really, you know, there could have been some really in people that chose to do certain art that at the same time of this nihilistic movement. And Rookmaaker does touch on it a little bit, where there are people who maybe they're like, they want to show the tragedy of life, but they also want to show that man still has meaning and purpose in the midst of that tragedy, that it's not pointless, that it's not all arbitrary, that it's not all just like, well, you know, what's the point, you know? But for whatever reason, you know, Picasso was like hailed as the artist of his time, even in his rebellion against the artistic institution. And so it's kind of a hard question because we don't really know, like, you know, then you get people who are like Gauguin or Van Gogh, who were not really known in their lifetime, and yet, you know, posthumously they're remembered, and they're a part of that progression, or that narrative, that like that movement through time of art and its understanding of metaphysics, you know. So I don't know if that really answers your question, Emilio, but that's my attempt.
I think so, but because in the sense like you could say that almost like at every point of history, everyone's painting everything. Like there's someone painting nihilistic, there's someone painting like something optimist, like with optimism, and the things that we pay attention to reflect to us what are we feeling that age. Because like we have all these like different options. What do we resonate the most? Or like with this cubist painting that's like funny and like doesn't make sense, or like okay, yeah. So it's almost like like a mirror, like a reflection. Like we have all these options, but this one resonates like as a whole, or as humanity, civilization, or a period of time. Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I think there's a place, they all have, like, there's a room for all of it. That's why, you know, I talk about the bravery of Picasso. He has a very important role. It's not to say like he shouldn't have been doing what he was doing. It's just interesting to say, what does it mean that he was doing what he was doing, you know? So yeah, does anyone else have anything to say? I'm not trying to rush this at all. I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm really thankful for the contributions and questions. They've been really good. Okay, here, Jack.
Hello. So yes, so I had to jump in and out of the call, but I think I was able to. So I was able to pick up some major ideas from the questions, and I think Emilio's especially, and Samuel's as well, about the question, the qualitative and the quantitative. Here's the thing. So I just happened to roll on Twitter just at this moment too. And if you don't mind, if you mind me sharing my screen, James, our friend James Murphy just posted, I think, a rather fun hot take. So if I need permission to share the screen. Mine.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I
think there's like a little arrow thing next to share screen.
Oh, okay. Yes, click that. Multiple.
then
Yeah, there we go.
Mhm.
Can you do it now, Thomas?
Yep, we're good. Okay. For
Let's
fun,
see, let's-
dramatic episode. So yeah, basically it's a hot take, and Jane's been doing a lot of this lately. So obviously this is more for rhetorical fun on Twitter, but sometimes being dialectical and extreme has some interesting concepts. So he's arguing about objectively the best coffee is Starbucks and the best chip is Dorito because of the mass distribution, basically the large sample size, and A/B testing. So I just bring it up is that one of the things I found in terms of one of the major shifts in artistic thought has been the shift of what is the definition of excellence being defined as the out of the norm exemplar. So this idea of the icon, I was here for the beginning part of the talk where the idea of the icon as the exemplar was the traditional old model of ontology. So the exemplar was the best. It was the virtue, it had full existence. And everything was just a participation of lesser lack of that excellence. So when we look at the Madonna and the child, for example, we relate to it because the Virgin Mary, the Madonna, is the exemplar of motherhood, right? And everything's just a participation of lacking degree of that excellence. So it's almost like attribution. There's basically like a power law distribution representation. And the more being, the more truth, the more goodness. So all these metaphysical principles of the old ideal was tied in all of these with all these concepts. Versus today, this is why I bring up James's hilarious tweet, is very much the idea of what is existent is the average, the norm, which is literally the middle ground, right? It's not the excellence. The excellence is the outlier. It does not represent reality. The average represents reality. And everything that's just misguiding, basically misalignments of that, lesser or more, are just our standard deviations of the reality, which is the norm, the average. So I just want to paint this picture that you find like in terms of drawing out this tension. For me, I find this is defined as where's the real existence? Is it in the average as the median, with a Gaussian distribution, everything around it? Or is it the exemplar? That would be my interpretation of understanding what art kind of problem has been to answer that question. Because then it's either art becomes just documentation, right? Or kind of basically what most of my art was like juvenile teenager resistance. This is my interpretation of it. I wasn't here for that part of the talk. I left when that happened. So I'm kind of drawing blanks on filling in what was said. So anyway, I just want to share that. Michelle, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this proposition. And I'll leave it at that.
Excellent. Thanks, Thomas. That was great. The average, yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, like, mass production comes into this. And it makes me kind of think that it does kind of make me go back to the Enlightenments Project in a way, honestly, Thomas, where there's a sense in which we want this to be accessible for anyone, like anyone. Which, I mean, there's some good things to like this, and it's slightly like this kind of egalitarian movement, or this idea that like anyone can access truth through their reason, because we all have that. Like, and it's funny because like we all have a Starbucks in our town, right? Probably multiple. We all have like, and it's interesting because then, yeah, it's almost like now today, if we use again Enlightenment ideas, like what you know is what you see, right? So we all in a sense know a lot of the same stuff. Meme culture, like we can recognize things. There's a McDonald's in every country. There's like very far away places can have a very similar knowing now because of the internet, because of globalization. And so what's interesting is like now it's kind of weird, because then to me it can only make me think that there's like a radical homogenization, and this makes it harder to encounter the other. The other is what we must encounter to be in real relation. And so to me it's almost like we might lose the very essence of humanity in like our relating to the other, and the mystery, and the thing that's kind of exclusive, the thing that like only you can, like only, you know, some people may only, there's only some people who may be able to see it, but because they have eyes, because they are a human themselves, they have the capacity to see it, you know. I don't know. I'm just thinking about that, like that. Those are the thoughts that come to mind off the top of my head. And like, yeah, being exclusive runs the risk of like elites, or like, you know, certain group of people decide, you know, it's like, but there is something about excellence, and everybody knows it. You know, like if your friend makes you an excellent coffee, you're like, this is good. You know, I mean, you still be thankful if it sucked, but like you know, there's something like this really good. You know, thank you, or like, wow, you put excellent effort into that, and that makes a difference. You know, so yeah, I think there's kind of that, like, I don't know. It's to me, those are the things that it made me think of, Thomas. I don't know. Is that an answer? Did I answer it enough?
It was more of a provocation.
Okay, good. Thank you so much, Javier. Let's see. Okay. Javier and Barnes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I couldn't help but notice how every period of art sort of responded to a type of lack that wasn't acknowledged. Which is very interesting, because you said that Rookmaaker looks at art as a type of metaphysical truth. So when we start combining all the periods of history together, it seems like anytime we try to assert some type of metaphysical truth, there's a response saying that actually we're still not getting the entirety of that truth, right? There seems to always be something lacking within that arena, which is very fascinating to me, honestly, because it kind of reminds me of Game of Thrones a little bit, when I forget, like the little girl, she becomes like the faceless assassin. Like she can take like any face she wants, and just start assassinating people. I think sometimes the metaphysical truth is something like that, where at the moment that we assert whatever that is, we get assassinated because about how wrong we are in that assertion. But yeah, you kind of running down it just made me really think about. I wonder if I'm not sure if Rookmaaker goes into, and you can tell me if he does, if he goes into exactly what that metaphysical truth is. Does he necessarily go into what it is, or does he just say like, hey, look, art is metaphysical. It definitely has like an ontological reality. But as you start going through all the periods, clearly every period is pointing to either a different metaphysical truth, or it is all different aspects of that metaphysical truth in response. So I'm just kind of curious on what your thoughts are for that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Javier, and a good point too. Yeah, Rookmaaker, he is a Christian, so he has that metaphysical framework of reality, and he was not born and raised a Christian. He was handing out like anti-Nazi pamphlets, and like he was put in jail. And when he was put in jail, somebody like handed him a Bible, and he just like read the Bible, and then he decided like that, you know, he wanted to give his life to Christ, you know, and so, and you know, live with this new understanding of the world, right? And yeah, so yeah, I mean, he makes that assertion, you know, he makes the assertion, and I think his sort of I would say like grounding for that decision and how that plays out in art is that Christianity in particular is very unique in that it has the incarnate God, right? And he really hopes to revive what is created and what are the manifestations of the transcendent God, right? The Father, right? The Godhead, because it relates to the fact that God decided to come into the earth and meet people in the earth and meet them in what they are doing and what they are making and what they are thinking about themselves and others. So, I mean, he doesn't necessarily, like, I wouldn't say by any stretch of the imagination does he go into like deep theology on, you know, why Christianity over Buddhism or other metaphysical frameworks. But he is coming from a Christian background and perspective. So just wanted to answer that question. Yeah. Thank you for the questions.
Hi there. My name is Cesar, and this is my first Boober session, so glad to be here. Finally was able to free up a Saturday morning for myself. So thank you for this presentation. And well, I guess there's a few things I could say, but I'm gonna just try and focus it into one line of thought for now. I think it's interesting we're saying the word art, and I guess I always have to remind myself that when we do say art, I think we always probably first think of visual arts as like a de facto, at least the way I hear people say that in everyday conversation. It's painting. When people say art, I think they usually think of painting first. And I don't have too much experience with history of painting, different painters. Instead, my knowledge is a little bit more in music. And so in a sense, we kind of consider music to be art, but it also has like an entertainment value to it that doesn't have to necessarily be art. It can have a commercial value to it. So in terms of this, thinking about the visual artists of what we were talking about from the Renaissance to about now, I was noticing how you laid out there's this idea that the transcendent is starting to fade away in a sense. If it was from the Christian God, then the target of where transcendence was lying kind of shifted according to different groups of artists, how they decided to decide, okay, well, maybe, I don't know if they would say it explicitly, like what is the new transcendent, but I think maybe that's what we're saying is all of them had something that they would probably consider transcendent. Otherwise, they would act super rational. And I don't think any of them acted completely rational where they just stopped painting, because that would probably have been the most rational decision. Instead, like you mentioned, Picasso was even saying, if the artist has to kill themselves in order to create something new, that's still needing to create something. That's not just like stopping right there. And so, do you think this could be a question for Michelle, but also just for anyone else who wants to touch in on it? Do you think that modernist artists, so artists kind of like in the modern tradition, that we kind of see this devaluing of humanity or humans, because in a way the artists are almost trying to take the position of the transcendent upon themselves and almost look at the humans as something separate, as if they're the vessel of transcendence. And that's why they could almost have this objective or like distant look at humans. Or like are they just ignoring that they're also just simple humans as well? And like maybe they're taking on too much of the metaphysics and trying to embody the metaphysics, when I think all of us have to just kind of realize a little bit more of a humble perspective that we might occupy, and that we don't have to have the answers to present to people within our art. So just any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Cesar, for what you shared and for the question. I'm gonna try and tackle it though, and I would love to hear from others too. Yeah, I mean, I think that I think the artist is always like a true artist is always somebody who is asking questions, to be honest. I think that they often present more questions than answers, but they are in a way offering certain visions of reality in what they paint or what they demonstrate. So yeah, I mean, I think that's why like something great about modern art is that it makes us question things again, you know, like even if it's just a very simple childlike question of like, well, you know, why, I don't know, like, where's the man's arms? You can't see it in like Picasso's work or whatever, you know, like, what is that? Just, you know, what is that? What is that? What is that about? You know, or like, oh, I like that's like, why did they choose the color blue or whatever, you know? So I mean, yeah, I think that's, it's a strange tension because the artist in a sense is always like, they're putting something out there for other people to see, you know. Maybe they don't want other people to see it. That's fine too. You know, I mean, I think art has a purpose in both context, just for being able to take whatever's inside and put it out there to be able to have a bit more of a sense of like to process through things and to express one's emotions and feelings. And like Thomas and I had a great talk on art therapy. So like there's a lot of, you know, great use for art, and it is humbling too, because sometimes you don't know even what is it that you're working through, and art sometimes will like draw it out of you quite literally, right? And make you see something you didn't maybe see before about yourself. So yeah, I mean, in a way, like what I'm hearing, and I might be hearing the question wrong, like yeah, I think that art took on a ridiculously ambitious attempt, like almost to become a religion, and that is a huge weight. Like it is that's a huge weight. And in some ways, like for somebody like Pablo Picasso, who I mean, it's hard. These people were very like hard to pin down in terms of like Kandinsky was an Eastern Orthodox, you know, he had some faith system. You know, Picasso will talk about like, I've never seen a saint with a clock, like because he felt like we shouldn't be constrained by some of our time, like some of our structures of time and metrics and whatnot. So there's a real sense. And then like Duchamp, he was another great Cubist painter and part of the Dada movement as well. And you know, he said something like he got into chess for a long time, like 25 years. And, you know, he basically saw like the person pursuing chess and the artist is the same, like just be basically like a monk and like, don't expect to earn money from this, but like, you know, basically give your life to it. So I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know that I don't think that like, I don't think that the artist has to have all the answers, nor should they. I think that they're supposed to be in a way like people who help us to reflect again, like the bard, like the poet, or like yeah, it's interesting, like with music, like music is much more tied to the breath, and you know, there's something quite like more related to the spirit itself in that type of art, you know, music itself, and like what we hear and what we respond to and all of that. So I don't know, I think that, yeah, I don't think the artist has to have all the answers, but I do think that they may need to acknowledge that they have living with the question. Yes, well, yes, of course, in the Rilke sense, we must live with the question. I think the artist does present us a question in what they present, what they make, because also like you can't talk to the artist necessarily, right? They leave you with something and you've got questions about it. So I don't know, like I think they're in that way is a type of humility. It's almost like the artist can't defend his own work, almost like Jesus being silent led to his crucifixion. Like there's something about this, like not being able to speak for yourself, but your art speaks, but it's silent. That is somewhat of a humility there. But yeah, like yeah, I don't think that they have to have all the answers. I think that they will present a consideration, and hopefully make us question again, like even the things we assert, right? And even the things we ascribe to, you know? And in that way, like art is a bit more mystical because it wants us to, even in being very physical, it always is metaphysical. It is always kind of has a mystical project of kind of like, well, what is it that is inside of you? You know, are you just doing it for, you know, being like religious? Or like Barnes had this term that I really like, which is like aesthetic altruism and stuff. It's just what it like, you just look like you're whatever. It's just like what it appears, or virtue signaling, all of that, you know. So I don't know if that was a good answer or an answer at all, but that's what I would respond with. If anyone else wants to chime in, please do. Thanks for prodding me with the question up here.
I just wanted to mention a piece of evidence for what you're saying, that the artist doesn't always have to really understand what they're doing as well. You showed a Francis Bacon painting, the Screaming Pope one. I remember watching a very quick documentary on him, or it was more of like an interview series. And so you see Francis like giving kind of an explanation of like what fascinates him with wanting to paint something. He has a moment of silence and then just says like, that was just total rubbish, wasn't it? And you hear the interviewer saying, no, like, I mean, that sounded good to me. And so just even having the painter say something and then immediately reflect on it and say, actually, that might not be correct, you know? And
yeah.
So it's, maybe that's the thing is, if the artist can point to us not knowing exactly where the exact meaning is, that allows us to, maybe that's where the relationship part comes in. The relational part comes in with art, is actually being able to use our interpretation and have differing opinions. And maybe that's where we act, the art maybe comes alive, is maybe from that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, that's why I kind of said like the universal is the, like, this is so cheesy, but I love words and I love to break them down and make other meanings out of them. It's like the universal YOU, you know, it's all about like there is something very interesting because it's like both this human resonance with it. We're all resonating with something, but it strikes us in different ways. And that's beautiful, you know, that's meaningful. And the meaning is in the difference, you know. And that's, you know, that's why I brought up like Hussein Nasser, the perennial philosopher, but there's like this idea that there is difference, and that doesn't negate meaning, you know, or the fact that there's this idea of like the essence of humanity, right? Like there's something common and different. It's a boathness in a sense, you know. So, but I think that's really beautiful, and I think that's really true what you said, Cesar. I think that's good. Thank you for elaborating. Does anyone else have anything? I know we're at the 3 mark, so we've kind of gone 1 hour and 30 here. So, I mean, I could do this all day, but I also, you know, want to be mindful of the time, keeping the Buber sessions to the general like hour 30 mark. So, I will just ask if there's any last things that anyone wants to say, and then I will probably conclude this. I really want to thank you all so much for your time and thoughts. Awesome, guys. Awesome. Thumbs
Thank
up.
you, Michelle.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Javier, for the privilege to speak today. And I'm really excited to see what else comes up with these Buber sessions.
Yeah, well, me too.
I just want to prove, Michelle, that I did give him this.
Ah! Oh my gosh!
On camera before I lose it and get accused of something. I don't know. There we go.
Yes, yes. That's awesome. Thank you for giving it.
Mailman. I love it. I love it.
Oh, I will tell that. I will say that. And you know, you said don't thank me yet, right? I haven't given it to him, but now, yes, you've proven it to me empirically.
Now you can.
There's some use for the empiricism, isn't there? Now I can thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, Javier. Thank you, Emilio, Cesar, Thomas, and Kevin. Thank you all so much for your time and your attention, questions, and insights. I appreciate it so much. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.